Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from the Creative Penn podcast, and today I'm interviewing Benison Anne O'Reilly. Benison is the author of Happily Ever After, a contemporary women's novel. She has also written the Australian Autism Handbook, as well as being a pharmacist, medical writer, and mum to 3 boys. Welcome, Benison.
Hi, Joanna.
Thanks for coming on the show. So why don't you start by telling us a bit more about your writing and publishing career so far?
Yes, well, you can probably tell I'm not 20-something. I'm a bit older than that, quite a bit older than that. It's interesting. I often hear about writers saying they've got this sort of drawer with all their unpublished manuscripts from their youth and all that sort of stuff. I have none of that. So if anyone's thinking that they aren't a legitimate writer because they don't have that, I'm a case in point. I didn't actually start writing properly until I did a bit of dabbling in my 30s, but not really until my early 40s. So, I actually was working as 3 boys, as you mentioned, and I was working as a pharmacist. Then I became a medical writer, and I just didn't have time to do all those sort of things as well. And it wasn't, I think the medical writing helped. It taught me how to be disciplined and to write clearly and to finish big projects, which I think you need for a novel sort of thing. So that helped. But it wasn't actually till my youngest son was diagnosed with autism, and I had a sort of big life-changing event that I think my inspiration for writing happened. And then a year when he went to school, which was a couple of years after that event, I was approached to write the co-write, I should say, the Autism Handbook, the Australian Autism Handbook, which is a practical but personal guide for parents. So that's when my writing career started. So that was with non-fiction. And then just before the Australian Autism Handbook was published, I was in a holiday in Fiji, and suddenly I had this inspiration for a novel. The whole plot came to me on a holiday, which is really interesting because I'd never thought I could ever write a novel. It seemed so daunting, but it was all there in my head, basically. I just had to go and write it down, which took a while, but still. And anyway, I gave it to my publisher, so I was different in the sense I already had a publisher, but I really just gave it to her to say, do you think this is worthy of me touting it around? And she said loved it so much, so she published it, and that was it. There was no queries or anything like that, which is unusual. For a while I thought maybe not, I wasn't a legitimate writer, but I had good reviews from it, so I think it was worthy of being published, even if it was not the typical path to being published. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think it's a brilliant story, and you managed to fit so much in. It's very impressive. Let's talk a bit more about your book in specifically. So you write, we're going to call it contemporary women's fiction,
Yes.
Otherwise known as chick lit. Maybe you could talk a bit about the genre. What are the sort of definitions of chick lit?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, my publisher doesn't like it when it's called chick lit, but I don't really care. If people want to call it that, just as what another fellow writer said, just as long as they like it, they can call it what they like, really, sort of thing. I think the contemporary women's fiction covers a sort of broader, and is not, can probably maybe thought of as more serious, whereas chick lit would, I think, by definition, always have a humour element to it. But it's not always about 20-somethings obsessed with Mr. Right and finding the right shoe and things like that, which I think is the image problem with chick lit. As I say, one of my fellow writers has said that her books are called mummy lit, and I guess in my case that might be a more appropriate term. It's still perhaps a little bit derogatory, but I think the whole thing is that they can still be serious, cover serious issues, but in a non-weight. That's not true. Not weighty is not the right word, but it doesn't have to be literary to cover serious issues, and writers like Marian Keyes, I think the Irish writer, is an example of that. She'll talk about alcoholism and depression and miscarriage and things like that. They're real topics that affect women, but you don't have to do it in a literary way for it to be worthwhile, I think. So yeah, I guess I don't know if I've answered the question, but yeah, I think there's no strict definition of chick lit, but except for the fact that yes, it is about, obviously, probably a central female character, and there is the expectation of having humour in it, and probably romance, but romance is not necessarily the pivotal thing. It's not like a classic romance novel where the romance is everything. It's more about her life and probably going on a journey, which all books are about, but a personal journey. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's great. So maybe you could give us some of your top tips for writing contemporary women's fiction, because I know that it's a genre a lot of people want to write in.
I think you have to sort of love the genre. I'm a person that's interested in, I like small dramas, I like concentrating on a few people and their interactions rather than the big panoramas, even with movies and things like that. So I think you have to be that sort of person who's interested in the intimate human relationships. It's a good idea to be able to be able to write humour, and I don't think I'm being vain in saying that I think I'm capable of writing humour. Actually, my husband was surprised when he read my book. He said, "I didn't realise you were so funny," sort of thing. But so I'm probably more funny as a writer than I maybe come across as an individual. But and I think the other thing, of course, you have to have a central character that captures the imagination, and she has to have flaws. Not be too perfect, but they're also likable. You've got to cross that's a fine line you have to tread, and maybe she won't be likable to everyone, but a lot of people will have to relate to her, and quite often, which is unusual in sort of genres, that they're quite often written in the first person, which is probably unusual. So my novel is written in the first person, which I found very easy because you know only what's going on in her head, so all the stuff, it makes it easier that you know what I mean, like she can't know what her husband's up to and things like that. So I'm worried about with my next novel whether I should write in the third person, just because I'm worried about the voice you have to have, creating a different voice for my next character. It's something I'm struggling with at the moment. Anyway.
So let's talk a bit about your writing schedule, because we often get questions from people who say, how do you get everything done? You have 3 kids, you have a son with autism, you have a job, you have all these other things going on. So how do you juggle everything, and how do you run your writing life, I guess?
Yes, well, that's a good question. At the moment, my children are imposing way too much, way too many demands on my time. But I just tend to write in school hours at night. Sometimes my lovely husband takes my younger son away camping on the weekends, so I can write on weekends. I think that for me, it's a drive that's there. I don't really have to motivate myself to write, especially fiction. Like would be dashing to my computer at the first available opportunity. So it cuts out a lot of other things in life. I think you have to give it priority in that situation, which is like cutting out. I virtually don't watch TV or anything like that. So and all those things. I still read because I think that's important. Obviously, you have to read, but I tend to read it at night time, sometimes in the holidays. But I regard that as research in a way as well. So, but yeah, you just have to give it priority. It has to be. It's important for me. It's important for my psychological health, I would dare say, and so that's why I will give it priority over other things in my life. Unfortunately, some things like my children and my husband, I do have to give them the attention they demand. It's
yeah. I was going to ask you, because I should tell people that we met in Bali last year, on the writers' retreat. And at the time, I remember you being quite frustrated because you were trying to get your publisher to get your books out on the Kindle and, trying to get ebooks out there. So I wondered if you could maybe talk a bit about, what the experience of being published is like, and how things are changing in the market, and how you kind of see all of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I'm probably moved around to being more optimistic about things now. Maybe that's fine because my book is available on Kindle. But yes, it was a difficult birth, we'll say. But it's out there finally now. But my publisher is quite a small publisher, and she's distributed with through a major firm, Pan Macmillan. So the Pan Macmillan reps would be out selling my book to the bookshops. So there was that element, but by the same token, she was a small publisher and I'm an unknown author, and I found that a real struggle. I got really good publicity. I had fabulous publicists and they got really good publicity. Of course, this is in Australia, but I had major magazines, reviews in major magazines and profiles. But still, bookshops, if you're unknown, they won't stock your book, or they'll stock 1 or 2 copies, and that gets hidden on the shelf. And there's all these other books at the front, the other named authors, and they, so people are going to go walk into a bookshop and they're going to say, oh, look, this book's here in front of me, I'm going to buy this book, So people have to actually had to go in and find my book, if you know what I mean, rather than actually stumble across it, so I feel with ebooks, that's actually given us, the starting off authors, a bit of a more level playing field. I don't know if you feel the same way, because you're just sort of out there the internet, and you can have excerpts of your book so people can read them. So and Twitter and Facebook and all these sort of social media stuff. I actually quite like all that element, because I've got a marketing degree as well. So I'm now regarding it as an opportunity. It's a challenge, and I feel like, as I say, it's more a level playing field for us starting out authors if we're out there competing on the internet. And online retail is the other way I'm selling books now, because maybe a bookshop won't stock it, but if people read. I've had people I've got to know on Twitter, and then they say, "Oh, I'm going to buy your book," and so they go to an online. So they're still getting the print version, but they're ordering online. So they have to wait a bit longer for it, but they're still getting the book. And so I think it's an opportunity for us all. So
no, fantastic. So you are actually seeing direct sales benefits from all this online stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's slow, but I think I look at it this way, that I actually just want people to read my books now. I've been told it's in a lot of libraries, and people are borrowing it in libraries. I've had that feedback, so I feel like, well, yes, I'm not making virtually nothing out of that, but if they read my book and like it, they're much more likely going to buy your second book as well. So, but yes, I'm selling books just by people knowing me on Twitter and things like that, and so yeah, it's good. It's nice to see. And of course, the whole thing with that, you don't go out there saying buy my book. You establish yourself as a person. And an identity, and you show interest in other people. I mean, that sounds like I'm being conniving, but you're genuinely interested in other writers and things like that, and then you establish a relationship, and quite often they'll be motivated to buy your book in that situation.
So where can people find you and find your books?
Well, as I say, I know you have a lot of international followers. I'm obviously an Australian writer. My book was published in Australia, but now it's on Amazon. And of course, I've got my own website, Benison Anne O'Reilly.com. So no AU for that one. So anyway, but I mean, if you go to my website, you can find how to find me there. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for your time, Benison. That was great.
Okay, thank you, Joanna.